This morning is partner morning, apart from other things. So we've invited a rather large number of various people who've integrated our software into their tools, and we'll have the partner around. And there's also going to be they will have stands here, so during the breaks you can talk to the partners. Nora is going to make more of an introduction on that. One of the interesting things, and I hope I'm not stealing part of Nora's speech actually, is that or her introduction. Is that because we have a large number of partners who have a wide variety of solutions and applications, we got two interesting situations recently. One was a company which, first of all, had looked at a project in which they were looking at a SAR data analysis, and they bought the Syrah package from Synaptic Science, which comes with JChemBase. And then they looked at JChemBase and they thought that cartridge would be quite useful as well. So then they sort of, within that project, they sort of ended up being ChemAxon customers. And then in a totally separate project, the same company is now looking at ELN. And they've realized that if they use, for example, DeltaSoft, that's got a ChemAxon cartridge on the back end. And so they can actually end up with the same cartridge. So but it was two separate projects which weren't talking to each other that accidentally ended up thinking, wow, that's great. Then we've got ChemAxon across the whole of the back end of that. Then we've got another example. So that's just an example of how we sort of filter into companies. The other example that we have is a company that recently chose for the ChemAxon cartridge for their compound sort of database. And then they came to our UGM a couple of months ago in Europe, and they've seen all these partner presentations, and they've suddenly realized that as they've already got the cartridge, how much more value they can get out of that investment, because they can choose an all wide range of different applications and different solutions, and just using that one license that they've got, based on the structure of the agreements they had with us, within all those other applications. So they realized that investing in the ChemAxon cartridge could be leveraged more than just what they'd originally thought about it for, but into a whole wide range of applications. Anyway, so that's a little bit about partnering. The compere of the day is Anu Sharma, who's going to host the morning. Anu joined us beginning of this year. February is more or less the beginning of the year. She is a medicinal chemist by background. She's working on sales here in the Bay Area. We deliberately... San Francisco Bay Area. Yes, not the Mission Bay Area. I think most people know that the Bay Area means San Francisco. I mean, if you had your territory as Mission Bay, I mean, you wouldn't have many clients, would you? A couple of surfers, but what can they do with our software? You can, yes. And she worked for 8.5 years at Chiron. We very deliberately wanted to put somebody with more chemist background into the sales team to help sort of our learning of what chemists really need. So I hand the floor to Anu, who's going to introduce the speakers and the sessions.
Thank you. Okay, so my name is Anu, as I have been introduced. Part of my... Can you hear? Okay, thanks. So part of my work also involves following up with the downloaders. And I request feedback from the downloaders because the feedback is very valuable to us. And you will find out why the feedback is valuable to us in this session. This is a jam-packed session with a multidimensional theme to it. You will be seeing the multi-dimensions in people, and you will be seeing the multi-dimensions in the technology. As far as the people go, the multi-dimensions in people who work for ChemAxon, the people who work with ChemAxon, and the people who use ChemAxon. So you will be seeing the whole range of topics in that section. And also, we will be seeing multi-dimensions in technology, the various kind of technology ChemAxon offers that is as has been mentioned by Alex in our partnership programs, as well as the users, how they use our products. So let me first begin with the first speaker, Dr. Pat Walters, who is... may I please invite Mr. Pat Walters? So before we begin, I would like to start with a big... start of the day. So Dr. Pat Walters has been with Vertex since 1995, and he was the head of the Computational Drug Discovery Technology Group. As we all know, everyone associated in this group is familiar and somehow related to the drug discovery in some way or the other. And we all realize that in drug discovery, we are looking for answers as soon as possible. What exactly as soon as possible means, we will be seeing this in Dr. Walters' presentation. And please take over.
Thanks. I'd like to thank everybody for getting up early. You know, I guess for those of us from the East Coast, it's sort of lunchtime, and for the Europeans, it's whatever time it is there. Yeah, so thanks a lot. I'd like to really express my appreciation to ChemAxon, and especially Alex Allardyce, for putting me on the program sort of at the last minute and giving me the opportunity to come here and talk to you about some of our recent work. So what we're really trying to do here is, I think, come up with a different take on cheminformatics, and hopefully I can show you that. But I really want to start out by acknowledging my co-authors, Yusuf Banani, our local head of chemistry, who sort of motivated some of this work, and Trevor Kramer, my collaborator, probably the greatest software developer on the planet, who I've had the pleasure of collaborating with for 10 years. I always forget acknowledgments, so I put them up front. So I've got a great group of chemists, biologists, computational chemists, cheminformatics people, and developers that I work with. But I also want to really acknowledge the toolkit providers, because I used to build all this stuff from scratch, and I'm so happy that I don't have to do it anymore, because I wasn't very good at it. Anybody who's used the program Babel sort of knows that. But anyway, so I wanted to thank the people at OpenEye, and I really want to thank ChemAxon, because I think we've been working with ChemAxon for close to 10 years now. I mean, support used to be I would send email to Chizzy. But the other thing that really amazes me about ChemAxon is I'll be in Cambridge, Massachusetts, working at 10 o'clock at night. I send an email to ChemAxon when it's God knows what time in Hungary, and I get an email back in about 10 minutes. So apparently, you guys aren't allowed to sleep, which, from my perspective, is great. Anyway, on to this. So maybe I don't have to emphasize this with this crowd, but these are a few slides that I put together for a talk I gave a few months ago to some university students. I think it's just important to remember that drug discovery is not just chemistry. That's not what it's about. It's not about structural biology. I mean, Vertex is a structure-based design company, but it's not all about structural biology. It's not all about enzymology. It's not all about animal pharmacology. What drug discovery is really all about is information. It's about making decisions. And drug discovery teams are making decisions every day. And our goal as people working in cheminformatics is to help those people make better decisions. And it's really confusing. If you're a chemist or a biologist working on a drug discovery program, you're trying to synthesize a lot of different information. You're looking at enzyme potency. You're looking at toxicity data. You're looking at properties. You're looking at PK. So, when I look at programs at Vertex, a typical project is probably tracking anywhere between 15 or 30 assays. And I've seen projects that track even more than that. And how do you really keep track of that? I mean, one of my colleagues sort of refers to drug discovery as whack-a-mole. It's like the carnival game where you whack one of the moles and two others pop up. But how do you even keep track of which moles you're supposed to be hitting? I mean, you've got so much data to keep track of. So we decided about 18 months ago, I decided to really try to take a step back. I mean, we have Verity, the cheminformatics system that we put in place about 9 years ago. And it's there, it works, people like it, it's good, but does it really address the problems that we want to address? So one of the things we wanted to do was look at some of the characteristics that we wanted in a program for looking at multidimensional drug discovery data. So we really wanted to be able to allow people to group the data logically. I mean, when a chemist is looking at the data, he's not thinking about 30 assays. He's thinking, what's the PK profile? What's the selectivity profile? So can we group the data to make it more intuitive? whenever you're working in a drug discovery program, you typically have a best compound. It's the best one you've made so far, or it's your competitor's compound, or it's something from the literature, or it's a substrate, but typically it's always compared to what? So can we really make the tool so that people can compare things more easily? Now, I said you're tracking between 15 and 30 assays. You need to be able to take a step back and look at the data from 10,000 feet and see what the profile looks like, but you also need the ability to quickly drill in and look at the details. So can we help people to do that? Then finally, and probably most importantly, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to make a molecule. So the most important thing for that is to really enable people to make that mental connection between chemical structure and biological activity. And I think a lot of our cheminformatics tools are really not geared that way. So we tried to think about how can we change things to do that. So let's start out by just taking a look at logical groupings of data. So Jeremy Gang was asking me last night, what does ASAP stand for? So I had to just, wait, I had to get him to get up early in the morning to see this. So, and this was not my idea. This came from Yusuf Banani, our head of chemistry. He came just bursting into my office one day, and he's like, I've got it, ASAP. And I was like, okay, what are you talking about? But I think it's nice because it's just one way, but it's a logical way to group your data. So what we do is we group things into an affinity category. So affinity is really the thing that you're typically tracking day to day on a project. So it's your primary enzyme assay or cell assay. Selectivity, that's pretty obvious. It's your counter screens. What do you not want to hit? Activity is usually your final endpoint output. So it's something that you're getting out of an animal model or a cell assay. Then we've got properties, CYPs, hERGs, solubility, et cetera, and your PK parameters. So this was great. Yusuf came into me and he's like, I want you to write this program. It's called ASAP. This is what it's about. And I said, okay, well, what does it look like? He's like, oh, you can figure that out. So, 18 months later, I'm still trying to figure that out. Yeah, I know. There's actually 2 Ps. Just give me a break. It doesn't come across as cool with 2 Ps. It makes me sound like I'm stuttering. So really, ASAP, when you come into it the first time, you've picked the set of assays that you want to look at. And this is sort of a one-time thing that you have to do, but you just go through and you just pick from menus and you assign each assay to a category. And we're not dogmatic about the ASAP categories. So we've got people who made up their own categories. I want to call my category in vitro ADME. Fine, I don't care. It really doesn't make a difference. The idea is just to get you to group the data. And then what we want to do is just set up cutoffs for what do you consider to be good in this assay? What do you consider to be fair? What do you consider to be poor? Because if we're just going to try to compare things, we ought to try to put stuff into buckets so that it's just a little bit easier to compare. Then we ask them to define whether a lower value is better for that assay and whether they want to see it. Then you can see it brings it up here. Everything's divided into groups. You can pick up these groups and move them around. So if you say, okay, what I want to do is I want to look at affinity on the left, or I want to look at activity or properties where I want it. So you can do this, and of course, all of this, the system remembers it and it persists so that the next time you come in, all of this will still be maintained. So far we're looking at, just kind of your typical chemical spreadsheet, and hopefully I can show you a couple of things that we've put in that make this a little bit atypical. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to do something that's intuitive to chemists. So of course we want to provide the ability to look at chemical structures the way that you want them, adjust structure coloring. It's amazing how picky people are just about the way that chemical structures are displayed. Like any good spreadsheet, we provide a simple sorting capability. We provide multi-level sorts in here. But you can see that since everything's color-coded, it makes it relatively easy to group things and see where the particular benefits and where the particular liabilities of certain chemical series are. The other thing that you want to do, obviously, when you're working through and doing data analysis is you want to be able to play what-if games. You want to be able to say, okay, what if I make my cutoff for what I'm calling a good compound in my affinity category 5 micromolar instead of 1 micromolar. So, like a lot of other packages, we tried to not reinvent the wheel. So we have sliders in here, and you can just select the assay that you want to play some what-if games with. You have a set of sliders down at the bottom that you can then use to adjust the coloring. And then down below that, there's a second slider that you can use to do filtering. So if you say, what I want to do right now is only look at compounds that are less than 5 micromolar, I only want to look at compounds within a certain range, you then just click on this filtering slider down here, adjust the filtering slider, and then you can bring data in and out. So it makes it very easy to select subsets. And once again, all of this is saved as part of your session. You can see it puts a little indicator up here showing that you're filtering. But the other thing was we didn't want people to have to recreate, so you can email these settings out to other members of the team. It's very easy to persist anything in here. Back to easy comparison to known best compounds. Once again, a relatively simple thing, but something that I don't see in most systems. So what you do in ASAP is we go in here, we sort the data based on a particular criteria. If I decide that that's my best compound, I simply right-click, set that to my reference compound. It then persists at the bottom, and you scroll up and down, and you can see that it's still there, and it's very easy to make comparisons. You can add additional structures. You can actually have as many as you want down at the bottom. People ask, why did you put it at the bottom? Your intuitive thing is to really look at the best one at the top, right? The problem is that really confused people with sorting. Because you put the best one at the top, it stays fixed. And then people go and click and start saying sort, and they're looking at the top, and nothing moves. So we ended up moving that down to the bottom. Having the ability to zoom in, and really, it's a lot of data. How do you get that all on the screen? How do you let people zoom in quickly? So what we've done is any of these sections, so you can see that we've got things into an affinity section activity. You can just double-click at on any one of those sections. The section collapses, and then you're just looking at the heat map. So you can say, okay, I just want to look at the numbers for my PK, and I want to see the colors for everything else. And you can still sort it when it's collapsed. You get a tooltip. When it's collapsed, you can still see what the column was. You can also just collapse the entire table if you want to get an overview. So if you just select Collapse All, it collapses everything down to just this heat map view. You've still got tooltips on the structure, so if you drag down, you can see what the structure was. You can also go to a view where you only collapse the columns. So if you want to see the chemical structures but keep everything else as a heat map, it's very easy to collapse that. You can go into heat map mode where you don't see numbers and everything is just a color. Or you can go into packed columns mode where it just compresses the column width so that everything fits onto the screen. A lot of times you want to make a detailed examination of a few compounds. And you may want to shift your view to do this. And the typical view with chemical structures in rows and data, chemical structures in rows and data in columns might not be the best way to do that. So at Vertex over the last few years, we've sort of developed this view that everybody seems to refer to as the top compounds view. So we call it that. I mean, it's really more of a pivot view, but you can just pivot the data, and then you get the chemical structures across the top and the data going down. Once again, this can all be persisted, and it can be emailed out. So what you can do is you can click on a link here. It will email this view out. Somebody clicks on a URL. It loads up ASAP with this view available. But the most important thing to me is really how do we relate this data that we're looking at back to chemical structure? And how do we get people to make the connection between the two and say, oh, it looks like all of my compounds that have a morpholine have lousy pK. How do I help people to make that intuitive connection? So this is kind of simple, but once again, it's something I haven't seen anybody do before. So what we do is we allow people to do a substructure search. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to, you can see our friend Marvin sketch. We're going to sketch a difluorophenyl thioether because there's a lot of compounds with that particular group in them. And I'd like to see how this relates back to activity. So what I do, and you can also see that the IUPAC name updates as we do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to associate a color with this substructure. Now I'm going to do the substructure search. And what it does is it creates a new column there on the right with that color in the cell for each compound that contains that. I can then sort that, and I can group all the compounds that contain that substructure. I can collapse and get back and see very quickly the relationship between that structure, that substructure, and the remainder of my activity profile. I can add as many of these substructure columns as I want. So if I have particular groups that I want to relate back to my activity profiles, I can just add these substructure columns in there. The substructure columns also persist as part of your session. So if you bring in new data, it automatically calculates all of those substructure columns, and those are filled in for you. We can do a very similar thing now with R group tables. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go down and I'm going to build an R group table by starting out selecting R group table, just filling in the corporate ID for one of the compounds so that I don't have to do a lot of sketching. Then I'll go through, delete a couple of substituents here. At this point, I go in and label the positions where the R groups are. I'll just draw those out. Use the wonderful right-click options in Marvin to label those as R1 and R2. So just while this is happening, so this is all just a thick client Java app, runs across Macs, PCs, Linux. So you can see over here now we've created two new columns. We can either fill in the chemical structures or the IUPAC names for the substituents. But the cool thing is now, when I collapse this, I can just go over here and sort, and I can sort by R groups, and I can look at the relationship now between the presence of different R groups and the activity profiles. This is very similar to something I saw yesterday in the talk from Lily. So we have something very similar. So what you want to be able to do is you sort of assign these colors to things, you put them into bins, and you'd like to be able to find out where's my best compounds according to the criteria that I've defined. So we have a really simple scoring scheme. You can make it more sophisticated, but by default, we just give you 2 points for every green cell, 1 for every yellow, and -1 for every red. You can assign weights to different assays. So if you have an assay that you think is more important for your project, you can assign weights to that. You can pick which assays you want to use in the score. You can assign the weights, the coefficients to whether the cells are red, yellow, or green. And then if you just get those in there, you click OK. Then what it does is it calculates a score, and you can then just sort by that score, and you can move the best compounds up to the top. You can do that in one of two ways, because if you think about it, the way the score is set up by default, the compounds with the most data are going to rise to the top. But then we have a flag in there where you can normalize and divide by the number of cells that actually have data. So then if you've got something where I've got really good enzyme activity and good selectivity, but I don't have any PK data on that, those can rise up to the top. And of course, like anything else, we've got sliders. You can assign color codes to all this. So this is really, I think, just the start of this. There's a lot more that we can integrate here. I mean, we're just trying to integrate things internally. So the next big quest for us is really trying to be able to pull in everything from outside and put it in context. People laugh when I put Facebook up here, but I think there's really a future for scientific social networking. And maybe it's not Facebook, but something like that that you can use within your company. I mean, how do you keep track of, what sorts of papers has this person been looking at, So this is sort of, if you take a look at the stuff that we saw on SharePoint yesterday. I mean, SharePoint is essentially, it's business social networking. And I think we need to be able to tie that all back into the data. We need to be able to tie into all sorts of other sources, either proprietary or open out there. We need to be able to tie into RSS feeds. There's a great way. RSS is a great way to allow people to keep track of data, and I think it's underutilized. So how do we really pull all that together? And for me, that's the next big challenge, and we really need to provide better tools. I love this quote from Edward Tufte, who's sort of the godfather of graphics. We're plagued with high-dimensional data and low-dimensional display surfaces, a problem that's existed since the first maps were scratched on rocks. So one of the things that we've done, just to make this a little bit easier, ASAP works a whole lot better when you've got a big display. So what we've done is in all of the chemistry office areas now, we've put 30-inch monitors with a little Mac Mini that people can use to drive it. And total cost for hardware for the machine, for the Mac Mini and the 30-inch display is something like $1,800. So it's not a big investment, and it really helps a lot. Is it possible to bring the lights down just a little bit? If not, don't worry about it. Oh, it's fun. Oh, this is far too scary for me. Forget it. It's fun. Okay. Yeah. Well, this next part kind of requires lowered lighting. So this is sort of where I want to be. This is a scene, of course, from the movie Minority Report with Tom Cruise playing the intrepid pharmaceutical researcher. So he's standing in front of his huge display and saying, okay, I'd like to see the PK data on this. Oh, are there any patents on that compound? Let me just reach out and pull in the patent data. Of course, at this point, the marketing guy comes in and says, when are we going to have a drug? Our intrepid researcher says, I've got to get back to work. Finally, his colleague has to push the marketing guy out of the way so he can get some work done. And this it seems like science fiction, but we're really not that far away from this. If you don't take a look regularly at the presentations from the TED meetings, I'd really recommend taking a look at TED.com. And there was a great presentation very recently from Jeff Hahn at NYU, where he has a multi-touch display surface that's about 30 inches. So it's a huge overgrown iPhone, and you can just drag things around. Microsoft's got Surface. I think we're going to get to this point where my vision is really you're sitting there with a chemist and you've got the electronic whiteboard and you start sketching stuff and you can just say, oh, and it recognizes what that is, and you start bringing in other things. I think we can really get there. It's not fiction. So finally, data has to drive decisions. We really need this, and I don't think that our current generation of cheminformatics systems are helping us as much as they could to drive decisions. We really need a new generation of tools that have to be visual, intuitive, comprehensive, and I think we need to rethink the way that we deal with both hardware and software. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. Anybody know what that is? No, it's if you look at that, then it says, okay, that's the Boston Red Sox in 2009, and Jason Bay is not very good at playing against the Green Monster. So, But this is the sort of thing I think we need. And thanks.
Thank you so much.
What? I'm Pat. Thank you.
Okay, Pat. Okay. So any questions from the audience? Okay.
I can speak up. So just not Project Natal from Microsoft. It's on YouTube, and the next year it will come for the regular Xboxes, which contains a full body scanner. So you don't need touch screen. You can select your drugs and check the PKs maybe in the near future by moving with your body without touching anything. So if you have time, check out that video.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks very nice of your spreadsheet. But you said, okay, in your spreadsheet you can add a new compound, right?
Well, I mean, what we're doing is we're looking currently at everything that's in our database.
Okay.
So yes, you can get to any compound or any piece of data that's in our database.
But basically you have to be real compound, not virtual compound, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. We have other tools for looking at virtual compounds.
All right.
And
yeah, because
if you got another 2 hours, I could go into that one too.
Yeah. Yeah, because I thought if you add some new compound and you have amazing data, all kind of problems will pop up.
Yeah. So.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
So as we've seen, these cutoff values in terms of coloring and grouping the categories can have a lot of effect on the structures where they belong. Did you consider maybe using analog values and analog coloring?
We were, and we thought about that, but we're trying to keep this simple. So we can do that. We could have done color gradients. We could do some sort of ramped function. But I'm trying to make this a simple tool that medicinal chemists and biologists can use. So you always have to sort of play off power versus ease of use.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you so much, Pat. And let's give him a big hand for